This podcast is owned and operated by the RCR Association, a private third party to the Department of National Defense. The content of this podcast is the responsibility of the RCR Association and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Government of Canada. The official emblems of the regiment are used with the permission of Regimental Headquarters, the RCR.
Okay. All right. Well, Cobra Gary, thank you very much for having me. This is my second video podcast with the Royal Canadian Regiment Association. So it's very nice that you ladies and gentlemen have had me back. Some of the resources I've used, not going to talk about these resources right now. I'm going to talk about these at the end of the presentation, if you don't mind, just to save some time. This is my resume or my CV, I guess you could say. You know, people ask me why I became interested in urban operations, urban warfare, and urban warfare history. I am not going to go into great detail. When I did my first podcast with Sergeant Singh, I was able to go into great detail about this slide. So I encourage the viewers right now that if you want to know why I became interested in urban operations and urban warfare history, you can go back to video number 1 that I did with Sergeant Singh, and I described this slide in great detail. But let me teach points to start off with an introduction. This is a quotation from the introduction of a book called Concrete Hell, Urban Warfare from Stalingrad to Iraq, written by my good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Louis DeMarco, teaches down at the U.S. Army War College in the United States. Fantastic book. And while you're reading this slide, urban operations has certainly become more prevalent, and the urban environment has become more prevalent. Depending on the resources you read, the resources are slightly different in the numbers, but anywhere from 50 to 65% of the world's population currently lives in an urban environment. And by the time the next generation of children grow up to become adults, the resources predict that anywhere from 75 to 85% of the world will be living in an urban environment. In fact, there's some countries now where approximately 80% of their population already lives in cities or towns or other types of urban environments. And so that seems to make people think, well, if a majority of the world's population is going to be living in an urban environment and continue to live in an urban environment, then we're probably going to be conducting more urban operations as a result. But that's not the only reason why. The other reason why is that our enemies know that urban operations are very complex and very challenging. And so they'll try to suck us in to fight into this particular environment because of all those complexities and those challenges. And so, it behooves us to get ourselves smarter on urban operations and urban warfare. I'm not suggesting that everybody and their dog has to become smarter in urban operations. I think any military, rightfully, it doesn't matter what kind of environment it is, whether it's Arctic, jungle, mountain, desert, rural, or urban, we have to fight wherever our governments tell us that we have to fight. But given the prevalence of the urban environment, and given the fact that a majority of the world's population is going to be living in cities and towns, and due to the fact that it is very complex and a very challenging environment to fight in, it behooves us to learn. Given those trends, it behooves us to learn how to fight in cities more and more. Excuse me. Okay. Concept of operations. I was at the tactics school for 7 years, Corporal Agrarian, and as a result, we teach the planning. We teach the estimate as a planning tool. We teach how to write a set of operational orders. So I always find that having a concept of operations is good for letting the viewers know where I'm going with the lecture. So the intent is to have students of urban warfare understand the more tactical aspects of urban operations in the offensive and defensive context that covers planning, tactics, sustainment, scheme, maneuver. It's going to be a verbal discussion using this PowerPoint. Now, a lot of doctrinal reference material. I used to use a 3-dimensional cloth model that when I was with the tactics school, but of course I'm not with them anymore. And so what I've done is, this is why I call it a virtual CMX or an electronic CMX, is because I use satellite photos from the United States Marine Corps' 29 Palms Urban Operations Training Area down in California to demonstrate the various control measures and some of the necessities for urban offensive and defensive operations. And the scheme of maneuver is broken down to 3 phases. Phase 1, control measures. Phase 2, the planning, tactics, sustainment. of urban operations in both the offensive and defensive, and then finally a conclusion. The main effort, definitely phase 2, and the end state is that, the viewers and yourself are going to understand the tactical necessities of urban operations and be well prepared to plan, conduct, and successfully complete future urban operations and or urban operations training exercises. Okay, control measures. We'll kick right into it. Why are control measures important in general, and why do you think they're especially important in an urban operations battle? What do you think?
I would say, especially in an urban operations environment, control measures are important because it's such a dynamic space, right? You're looking at there are buildings, right? It's how do I explain this in a way that sounds educated? It's a 3D environment. I don't know, sir. But could you enlighten the audience?
You're going down the right road.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah, you're going down the right road. It's that three-dimensional urban environment. It's the buildings. It's the density of the urban terrain and the subterranean systems. And so, like, don't we have it easier? Well, not easy, but easier in a rural environment where you can look and you can see 100 meters, 300 meters, 500 meters forward, to your right, to your left, behind you. But you get into a city with, dense urban terrain, and, you're in a room or in a hallway, or maybe you can see across the street, right? And so, and if you have friendly forces all around you, you're going to need these control measures to ensure that, A, you can close with and destroy the enemy, and two, that, there's no friendly force, friendly fire incidents or anything as such. So yeah, particularly important in an urban operations battle. And some of the control measures that we use in other environments are applicable to the urban environment, and some of them are very specific to the urban environment. So I'll talk about those right now. I'm going to go, here's the list, and I'm going to go through this list one point at a time just to discuss them very briefly. And I have some historical examples to go along with them. So the first one is dividing into sectors, the alphanumeric method. Now, this is Rocky Ford Urban Operations Training Site out of Canadian Forces Base Wainwright out in Alberta. It's a satellite shot of it. And what you see there is I've broken up Rocky Ford into various alphanumeric code words or codes. So buildings are the whole of Rocky Ford's been broken down into Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and then within the buildings, within each of those sectors, I've broken them down into numbers. So Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Bravo 1, Bravo 2, et cetera. Now, this is a fairly popular control measure that I've seen. I've taught urban operations frequently for the past 12, 13 years, and my students usually use this control measure quite frequently because it's easy to do. It's easy to use. You can very easily break a city down by, putting lines on streets, etc. So it's a fairly common one that I've seen not only with my students, but throughout urban warfare history as well. The only challenge that may occur with it is if you have a very dense urban area with dozens or hundreds or even thousands of buildings, you're going to have a lot of alphanumeric sectors, and you got to make sure that you're not, accidentally putting a unit's call sign in there, like, Bravo 2-1 or something of the such, just to alleviate that confusion. This was actually done during the Battle of Algiers in Algeria. There was a French paratrooper brigade that was fighting an insurgency in Algeria. And what they did was not only did they break the city down into various alphanumeric sectors, and they had their maps as well, but what they did is they actually painted the big alphanumerics on the buildings within Algiers itself. So this way, when the French paratroopers are working their way through the city, all they had to do was look up at a building and they knew what the code word of that building was. If they were taking fire or if they needed to, bring up supplies, they could easily get on a radio and saying, we're taking fire from Bravo 2-3. We're currently in building Charlie 3-4 over. And so it was a great way to identify the buildings and allow the troops on the ground to have that great situational awareness. And in this way, back at their headquarters, they could look at the maps and know exactly where the troops were and where the enemies were. And they painted the alphanumerics high enough up on the buildings that the insurgents couldn't go up and paint over them, which I thought was pretty ingenious on their part.
Yeah, this looks like a very interesting way to subdivide. For example, the company commander can give different platoons a different letter, and then the platoon can give different sections, different numbers. It seems that's when I looked at that. That's how I would have employed it.
Yeah, cool. All right. So next one is map numbering. This is where you don't break the city down into alphanumerics. You just barf out a bunch of numbers and put them on the buildings or the subterranean systems or something of the such. And you can see what I've done with Rocky Ford Village. There's only 24 buildings, so I was able to put 1 to 24 on there as well. And this actually occurred during the Battle of Marawi in the Philippines, where the city of Marawi itself is fairly small. And so the Armed Forces of the Philippines were able to number all of the buildings. Sometimes they did some alphanumerics as well. Like if there was a building 900 and it had 3 parts, they would be 900 Alpha, 900 Bravo, 900 Charlie, or something of the such. But this is fairly easy to do if you have a small city or a small town that you're going through. But Corporal Guerri, what if you're fighting in a very large town or a large city where there's, hundreds or thousands of buildings? Do you think that this is going to work at all?
I don't think this would be practical in that situation, sir.
Yeah, like, you don't want to get on the radio and say, I'm in building 105,622, or like, that's, that would be just ridiculous, right? And having to number all those buildings, et cetera, would be ridiculous. So, yeah. So it works in small towns and cities, but it doesn't work if you're fighting in very dense urban areas with thousands or tens of thousands of buildings, that's for sure.
Understood.
Report lines and phase lines, we see these in every environment. And you can see there, I've just parked out some report lines or phase lines and given them code words. Second Battle, Fallujah, the Americans did this. They, in fact, what they had was all of the phase lines or report lines that went from north to south were named after women, and all of the phase lines that went from east to west were named after men, and they put them in alphabetical order. So that, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, with the various names of the men and the women. So it was easy to remember. That's something that's fairly common as well. Objectives, again, fairly easy within an urban environment, because sometimes, if you've done a good intelligence preparation of the operational environment in that city, the buildings are certain colors, or they have certain, there's certain facilities, or they do certain things. And so it's very easy to name the objectives. I've picked a bunch of Canadian battle honors from the Great War here and just put them onto the map. I go back to the Battle of Marawi again, with the Armed Forces of the Philippines. They would just look at the color of a building and say, right, that it's got a green roof, that'll be the green building, the red house, the pink house, the avocado house. They just gave different objective code names for various buildings. Nicknames. Again, very easy to do in a city. As you can see with Rocky Ford there, I've just parked out some nicknames. That 5-point intersection, I've just called it 5 points. There's the farmer's market, a parking lot, etc. The Canadians did this during the Battle of Ratona, the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada in particular, when they arrived at Piazza San Francesco up in the northwest corner of the city. There was a dead horse that was in the middle of the piazza that had been killed by German or Canadian artillery. And so the company commander, the A company commander, June Thomas, radioed back to the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sid Thompson, "Sir, we're at Dead Horse Square." And Piazza San Francesco became Dead Horse Square to the Seaforth Highlanders for the rest of the battle and for the rest of history.
Understand the difference between nicknames and the objectives themselves when you get something. Are nicknames something that's more hasty than deliberate?
No, I mean, nicknames could be something that, objectives are pieces of urban terrain that your troops want to seize or capture or destroy the enemy position. Whereas nicknames are just pieces of urban terrain, either on the subterranean, that are good for coordination points or something of the such. So you don't necessarily need to occupy them or seize them, but your troops need to know where they are so that if they can get on the radio and go, right, we need a resupply of ammunition. Can you bring it up to 5 points over? And then, the logistics folks will know to bring the ammunition to 5 points. So they're not necessarily things you have to seize or occupy or destroy an enemy position at. Boundaries. Okay, so again, you see this in any environment. You can see I've just taken Rocky Ford Village there, and I've broken it up into various battalion and company bit boundaries. I've got 2 RCR taking Rocky Ford itself, and I've broken it up into Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie and Delta companies and how they're going to fight. We've got the 3 Van Diziem on the north side, and we've got the first Patricias on the south side of Rochford. So these are fairly common. I'm not suggesting these boundaries would work. I've just parked a bunch of boundaries up. But this is something that's fairly common. You've seen it during the Battle of Ortona, the Battle of Aachen, Second Battle of Fallujah and Vari once again. The thing about boundaries, though, is that human beings are inherently lazy, and so are staff officers. And so staff officers will see streets and go, okay, well, this is going to be easy. I can just put a boundary on a street, and we'll have Alpha Company on one side and Bravo Company on the other, or something of the such. And we have to be careful about that, because then it becomes a question of who owns that street. Is it the one company or the other? Or is it that battalion or the other battalion, or that brigade or that brigade? So if you just place a boundary on a street and, both units want to use that street for either, advancing or withdrawing or bringing up supplies or something of the such, there has to be ownership of the street. Like, who does it belong to? Who gets priority? So sometimes you might have to take that boundary and actually move it right over to the edge of the buildings and say, right, this platoon, this company, this battalion, this brigade owns that particular street complete, so that they can have control of it and they can advance or withdraw or do whatever they have to do on that particular street. So beware of staff officers who lazily just put the boundary onto the streets and go, okay, my job is done when it comes to boundaries. Coordination points. So again, when you're fighting through that dense urban terrain, where is that section or squad to your left or right? Where is that platoon? Where is that company? Where's that combat team? Where's that battalion? So it's handy to have coordination points to link up with the units to your left and your right. So this way, one unit doesn't get too far ahead or another unit doesn't get too far behind. And the Battle of Aachen in Germany, the Americans did this really well, where the squads had coordination points, the platoons, the companies within the battalion all had coordination points. So this way they would advance to a coordination point, and they would not go any further until they had linked up with the squad or platoon or company on their right and their left. So this way, one unit wasn't getting too far ahead of another unit, which would allow the enemy to come in and flank that a unit that had gone too far ahead. So the Americans did this very well during the Battle of Aachen, and it's a really good teaching point to pass on, especially when you're fighting in that dense urban terrain and you don't know exactly where those units are to your left and right. If you have those coordination points ahead of time and say, right, we'll link up there just to make sure, we don't get too far ahead of you and there's no friendly fire casualties as well. In NATO doctrine, it's called report centers. But really, what we would say in the Canadian Army is just headquarters locations. So, it helps. It doesn't matter if you're a platoon commander, company commander, battalion commander, brigade commander. If you're fighting your troops through a city, let them know ahead of time where your headquarters is going to be during each phase. You can see here for this, for my 4 phases here in Rochford Village, I've placed my headquarters first in the wood line up in the northwest corner, or sorry, by the southwest corner. And then I've got it in a building during phase 2, and then that's a church actually in phase 3. And then down near the bottom, I'm going to be in that building at the east end of Rochford. So it's good to do this, because then this way, when, not if, but when your comms go down, which is very frequent in urban operations, especially when you have troops inside buildings or in subterranean systems, and the radio waves aren't getting outside of the building, or they can't go around the building. If your troops know ahead of time, right, I know where lieutenant or captain or major or lieutenant colonel what's his pickle is going to be, I can send a runner back and go to that building and know that he or she is going to be there, so I can pass on any urgent messages or something of such. I've got the brilliance of Captain Stephen Pickering. Captain Pickering is with Princess Patricia's Canadian Line Infantry, and I had him as a student for 2 courses down at the Tactical School, the Army Tactical Operations course and the Infantry Dismounted Company Commanders course, and he had to attack Groningen Village down in Canadian Forces Base Gagetown, which is a small urban operations training village that we have there. And as I was assessing Captain Pickering, as I was walking through Groningen Village, watching him lead this company of Van Duziem soldiers through Groningen Village, he had told them ahead of time, right, I'm going to be in this building during this part of the fight. And he was absolutely brilliant because he knew how far forward he had to be to affect the battle, but not so far forward that he was going to get shot by the enemy force. And so this way, if troops had to find him, they knew exactly what building that he was going to be in. And so they would run back, tell him, he'd say, all right, got it. Okay, next platoon, forward past the lines, let's go. And so this way he was able to control the battle. It was an absolutely brilliant clearance of Groningen Village by Captain Pickering and that company of Van Diziem that he was leading on that particular course. And of course, given the urban terrain and artillery and close air support and the engineers with their explosives, you got to have primary headquarters and alternate headquarters. So this way, if the close air support strikes your building, you can move to another building. And so your troops have to know where all of your headquarters are as you're doing this fight, so that when the comms go down, they can run back to you and pass on any orders or messages. And at the same time, you can pass on any direction.
Yes, that was going to be my question, sir. I was going to ask if you also assign alternate HQs.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I mean, it could just be a building across the street if you want, or you can duck into a sub-training system. Again, do a good intelligence preparation of the urban environment to mark those ahead of time so that as you're going into the battle, your troops already know where those primary and alternate headquarters are going to be. All right. Arcs of fire allows you to isolate buildings to a certain extent. In Rocky Ford, it's quite easy because the buildings are fairly spaced apart and there's not a lot of collateral damage. But if you get to a very dense urban terrain, like a very large city where, there's huge skyscrapers in the way, a very complex subterranean systems, arcs of fire are going to shrink rather drastically. You might be able to only be able to see across the street. And if you're inside of a building, you're not going to stick yourself outside of the window and make yourself a target. You're going to have to take a few steps back, make sure that you're in the darkness of the room. And so your left and right of arcs, they come down to the left and right of that window frame or that door frame or that mouse hole or something of the such. So you're going to have more troops looking out more windows and doors and openings in order to, have left and right of arcs that are able to cover a wide enough area. So arcs of fire, you can do that. You can see I've done it here for 1 platoon, 2 platoon, and 3 platoon in Rocky Ford. But yeah, that works in Rocky Ford, but they may become very constricted and very dense urban terrain. And you have to find the balance. So I've taken all of the control measures and I just barfed them onto Rocky Ford Village there. Of course, that's not going to work at all. If you were to give this to any of your subordinates, they'd look at you like you'd lost your mind. So find the balance with control measures, whether you might have to issue, several traces or pieces of talc or electronic pieces of talc or something of the such if you're working with more updated electronic systems. Because, you can't, I think Rocky Ford Village is under there someplace. But see, obviously you can't issue that to your troops because they're not going to be able to make sense of that. So you might have to have a number of talcs or control measures on different products so that your troops can can make sure they can fight this battle properly without any friendly violence. I was with the Argyle and Sutherland Hinders of Canada, Princess Louise's. I was their operations officer for 4 years, and for 3 years down in Hamilton there, we did 3 years of urban operations training. And as an additional control measure that we made up, I'm breaking away from doctrine a bit here. As an additional control measure that we made up is if the company or the platoon commander was outside of the building and they needed to know they needed to fire at an enemy sniper or something, or there was an IED had gone off on a particular floor. We came up with this alphanumeric system to identify, doors and windows for buildings. It would be really nice if all buildings were as symmetrical as this one, but you might have buildings of various shapes and sizes. But as an example, this is something that the Argyles came up with when it came to identifying doors and windows. So, for example, instead of saying, "Oh, there's an enemy sniper in that window that's 3 or 4 floors up and it's on the left side," you're taking valuable time talking when you can just say "Sniper Alpha 4." Everybody looks at the building. You can see I've broken the building down to Alpha Bravo Charlie. Each floor is its own number, so you can very easily find Alpha 4. Don't go into Charlie 1. There's an IED. Okay. So don't go into that door. Don't go into the Charlie 1 door because there's an enemy ID there. Go in through Bravo 1 instead. So it was something, and you can make it as simple or as complicated as you want. If you want, oh, there's a sniper in Whiskey Alpha 4. Okay, Whiskey means a window. Alpha is that sector of the building, the 4th floor. Or, there's an ID in Delta Charlie 1. Door Charlie 1. Got it. So there's other control measures that you can use. Colors are popular. Like the right side of the building is red. The left side is blue. The back of the building is black. The front is white. You can use those color coded. But this is something that the Argyles came up with, and I thought it was pretty good to use when they were either fighting offensive or defensive urban operations in their training exercises. Yeah, very much so. And, it could work the other way too. Whereas if you had troops clearing these rooms inside the buildings, they could radio back. And if they had a template, if they had a diagram of the building, they could say, right, we've cleared Whiskey Alpha 2, Whiskey Bravo 2, but we're just in the midst of clearing Whiskey Charlie 2 at the moment, sir. Bam. Right. So, it was another way of being able to identify, okay, where are the troops? Okay, we're up to the 3rd floor, but we've only cleared Whiskey Charlie 3, Whiskey Bravo 3. Okay, good. Now the combat team commander, company commander, platoon commander outside, they can look at the buildings and go, okay, right, we got to put fire up into Whiskey Alpha 5. It's been verified. The enemy's still up there, right? So we're good to go that way. Yeah. All right. Any questions on control measures at all, Corporal Aguirre?
I think I answered all my questions as they popped up, sir.
All right. Let's go into tactical offensive urban operations then. So some motherhood points. I'm not trying to tell you how to eat pickles, but, just some motherhood points. And again, most of my students now, I don't teach the hands and feet skills. Like I used to do that for the first 10 years I was doing urban operations. I taught all the hands and feet skills, but for the past 15 years now, it's been very focused on platoon, combat team company, battalion, battle group, brigade commanders. So I'm talking to, very senior officers, junior officers, and senior NCOs here. So, they're the one coming up with the plan. They're not the ones clearing the rooms. If Lieutenant Colonel was clearing a room, that's not a good sign that the plan's going well. So yeah, they're coming up with the overall plan. Don't get sucked into, what Corporal What's-His-Pickle is going to have to do to get in through that window. Okay, let Corporal What's-His-Pickle and the sergeant and maybe the platoon commander figure that out. So the commanders come up with the overall plan. They're not the ones clearing the room. Find the balance with the plan, simple but detailed and clear. Momentum, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Borrowed that from our special operations forces folks. What I mean by that is normally I'll take Ortona and Fallujah as an example where the buildings are very similar in size and height. Normally it would take Canadians at Ortona or Americans at 2nd Fallujah, more or less. It would take them 45 to 60 minutes to clear a building if they had armor, artillery, and engineer support. If it was just the infantry clearing a building, it usually took them about 90 minutes. So when you think about that, if it's going to take an hour for a combined arms platoon with armor, artillery, and engineer support, 45 to 60 minutes to clear one building, clear one house, okay, well, that means it's going to take 3 hours for a company because it's got 3 platoons. It's going to take 3 hours for a company. So it might take 6 hours for, a battalion just to clear, 9, 12 houses, right? So the time starts to add up. And what you can't do is you can't rush your troops as they're fighting through these rooms. Okay. So brigade commanders have to let their battalion commanders fight this urban battle, and battalion commanders have to let their combat team commanders fight the battle, and they have to let the combat team commanders have to let their platoon commanders fight the battle, and the platoon commanders have to let their section commanders fight the battle, but don't rush it. Don't rush it. If you rush this process, all you end up doing is putting friendly bodies into body bags. If you try to rush the process, if it's taking an hour to clear a house, it's going to take an hour. Just accept it and let your platoon commanders and your section commanders do it. And so this is why if you let them methodically do it, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? It takes a long time to clear a building. It takes a long time to clear a street. It takes a long time to clear a suburb, a town, a city, etc. So time is a resource. And so just let your troops do their thing. Let them do the drills properly. Don't rush it. And this way you'll methodically, deliberately clear the urban terrain and the subterranean system. So slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And as I mentioned earlier, you are going to lose comms. Doesn't matter if you're brigade, battalion, combat team, company, platoon, section commander, you're going to lose comms with your superiors and your subordinates. So you're going to lose control of the situation. 3-dimensional, dense urban terrain, sub-training systems. You've lost comms. They've physically disappeared into buildings. You can't see them anymore. So you're going to lose control of that situation. Try psychologically prepare yourself for that, and then do what you have to regain calm so that you understand what's going on and you have situational awareness. All right. So now we're going to get into this, what NATO urban operations doctrine calls the essential tactics. It's really how do you move your section, your platoon, your company, combat team, battalion, brigade through a city. That's all this is. So how are you going to move through a city? The first method is through infiltration. So Corporal Aguirre, what do you think I mean by infiltration? You're going to take your section, squad, platoon, company, combat team, whatever, and you're going to infiltrate into a city. What do you think I mean by that?
You're going into unfriendly territory, so it's how you're going to conduct that movement of troops. And
okay, you're probably going to do that regardless of it. But infiltration is, like, by the word, you can tell that what you're trying to be is you're trying to be sneaky about it. You're trying to go in nice and quietly, and maybe you don't want to advance down the main roads. Maybe you want to go through the back alleys. Maybe you want to go through some subterranean systems. But what you want to do is you want to infiltrate into the city without the enemy knowing that you've gotten into the city, right? So this way, suddenly you can pop up in that building, beside the enemy or behind the enemy, or you can pop out of that subterranean system, right? So this is a way of getting into a city without the enemy knowing you've done that, and having the element of surprise when suddenly you appear from a piece of urban terrain that they didn't expect you to appear from. So this way you get into the city and you don't have to worry about clearing buildings en route because you've snuck by a lot of the urban terrain already. So as a military history example, I like to go to the Battle of Hue, where the North Vietnamese Army, now more popularly called the People's Army of Vietnam, and the Viet Cong, which were the insurgents of the National Liberation Front. This is where what they had done actually for several weeks is they had infiltrated not only personnel, but they infiltrated weapons and ammunition and rations and medical supplies into the city itself. So you can see my presentation there, Corporal Aguirre. Yes, you can see the map on the left and the photos on the right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I should point out that you see the red rectangle around the compass there. All of my maps in this presentation are oriented to the north. So I'm not going to, I'll say it now so I don't have to keep repeating myself over and over again whenever I show a map. So just to let you, so you can see the city of Hue there on the left, and this map comes from Colonel Lou DeMarco's book, Concrete Hell, in which he discusses the Battle of Hue. Hue is broken into two parts. It's divided by the Perfume River. And the old Hue, or the Citadel, is actually a walled city on the northwest bank of the Perfume River. And the new Hue, which is obviously the newer portion of the city, is this triangle-shaped part of the city on the southeast bank of the Perfume River itself. And for several weeks, the Viet Cong infiltrated into the city, personnel, weapons, ammunition, rations, etc. And they scouted out and did recce patrols throughout the city to identify where all of the American and the South Vietnamese Army, the Army for the Republic of Vietnam, where all of their locations were within the city, where all their headquarters were, where all their FOBs were, et cetera, all their forward operating bases, their platoon houses, and their other military buildings. And then on the eve of the Tet Offensive, which was this large North Vietnamese Army Viet Cong offensive that attacked about 40 cities, towns, and military installations all through South Vietnam, the Viet Cong unmasked themselves and started attacking American and ARVN positions, and allowed the North Vietnamese Army's 4th Regiment to break into Old Hue, and the 6th Regiment to break into Old Hue, the 4th NVA Regiment to break into New Hue and attack all of the towns and cities, or attack all of Hue. And they basically took the entirety of the city within 24 hours. But they could not have done that if they had not infiltrated into the city for weeks beforehand. So that's a good example of an infiltration into a city.
Yeah, I didn't know when you first explained infiltration,
Uh,
I didn't conceptualize that it could take a long time, a couple of weeks. I was assuming it'd be something fast. So that's interesting to learn.
Yeah, it could take several weeks, or you could do it in one night. It all depends on the context and the mission, right? Maybe you could sneak a squad or a section or a platoon or company in a couple of hours. That's a possibility too. It's just this particular example, they took several weeks because they wanted to build up their supplies for the big attack. All right, the second type of movement is penetration. And what happens in a penetration, there, is that you you are going down streets and back alleys, but what you're not doing is you're not clearing buildings en route. You're trying to get to the objective as quickly as possible. And you know what I said earlier, right? About clearing even a small building could take an hour for a combined arms platoon. Well, if that's going to take a lot of time, maybe you want to bypass those buildings and just get to your objective, whatever that objective is. And so you bypass buildings. And if you take fires, sure, you go in and you fire back and you take that building. But if not, you try to get to your objective as quickly as possible. Now, Corporal Guerri, what do you think are some pros and cons to bypassing buildings and sub-training systems to try to get to that objective as quickly as possible? What do you think?
Um, you're going to give the enemy that's at the objective less time to prepare themselves because you're going straight for them instead of fighting directly to them. That would be
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good.
that would be an advantage. And then potentially a disadvantage would be that since you're pushing through enemy territory, you can get engulfed or circled.
Exactly. You're bypassing buildings that might have enemy in them. The enemy hides and camouflages themselves, allows you to pass, and then suddenly they attack you from behind. Or now you're suddenly cut off, right? So penetration, yeah, it's faster, it's quicker to get to the objective, but you risk your security in doing so, right? So there's pros and cons to both. An example I like to use here is the United States during the Battle of Mogadishu. The famous Black Hawk Down incident where, 3 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down on the 3rd of October, 1993. Of course, the movie that made on the book, based on the book by Mark Powden on that. But you can see here is the mission for the Americans is they understand that Mohammed Adid, who was a powerful warlord throughout Somalia. Some of his subordinates are having a meeting at a target building in the Bakara market. And so the Americans are going to move from Mogadishu airport where they're stationed. They're going to penetrate into the city. They're going to bypass all these buildings and they're going to get to the Bakara market, get to the target building and nab Muhammad Adid's subordinates in order to accomplish the mission. Of course, we know from the book and the movie that this particular mission became very fouled up. For a number of reasons. Largely, the Americans had done a number of these raids already, and they set a pattern. And so the enemy is a living, thinking human being that reacts. And so they had learned of that pattern, and so they were ready for the Americans when they launched this particular raid. But it is a good example of a penetration where the Americans are not clearing buildings en route. They're just getting from the airport to the Bakara market and to the target building to try to achieve the mission. Here's an example of a dismounted penetration. We have Iraqi Special Forces from the Counterterrorism Service, the CTS. You can see they're working their way. They're not clearing the buildings en route. They're just walking down the street. They've got some flank security out there watching down a street as well, but they're not clearing buildings en route. They're just walking down the street doing a penetration. So there's another example of that. The next essential tactic or movement is a thrust. Now, unlike a penetration, Corporal Guerri, a thrust is when you're actually clearing buildings en route to get to your objective. So, Corporal Guerri, what do you think the pros and cons are of clearing the buildings en route?
You're sacrificing speed for security, sir. So that would be the pro.
Exactly.
In a way, that's also the con.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's going to take you a lot longer to get to your objective, right? But at least you're clearing buildings en route so nobody can attack you from the flanks or from behind, right? So there's good pros and cons there. An example of that, the Israeli Defense Force during Operation Defensive Shield in 1982, when they went into Janid and Nablus, were doing that, clearing the buildings en route as they're moving down the streets. The Russians in Grozny, the first battle of Grozny, they had actually started doing thrusts first. And so what eventually happened, there's Grozny located there in Chechnya. And what had happened was these, my 17-year-old daughter could come up with a better plan than the bozos who were in charge of the Russian army in the mid-1990s. What they thought was, okay, we're not going to tell the troops that we're going to war. Just put them in the back of the trucks and we'll drive the armored fighting vehicles and the trucks single file down the streets coming in from the north, the northwest, the southwest, and the southeast. And once we get to the presidential palace there in the center of the city, we've won. That's the cunning operational plan. Well, they did that, and the Chechens, who had spent several months planning their urban defense, were able to attack and defeat those columns as they came into Grozny. So the Russians had to suck back out of the city, come up with a new operational plan. And instead of doing penetrations like they originally did, they started thrusting and clearing the buildings as they fought their way through the city itself. And finally, a swarm is the last type of movement. And what that is it's a series of coordinated thrusts and or penetrations as friendly forces go into the city. And I'm saying coordinated in the sense that they're all linked together. I mean, you can't do, I don't really call what the Russians did in Grozny originally a thrust, where they had 4 different penetrations coming in from each side of the city. A swarm is coordinated, a series of coordinated penetrations and or thrusts working together as they work through the city. The Russians, during the Battle of Stalingrad, as an example, which is really the largest modern urban warfare battle in history, the Germans did this in Stalingrad. This map also comes from Colonel Lou DeMarco's book, Concrete Hell. You can see Stalingrad, the Volga River there. A majority of the city rests on the west bank of the Volga. And you can see that the Germans are doing a series of swarms using several divisions going into the city itself from the south, the west, and the north. The Americans also did this at the Second Battle of Fallujah, where you see here, the Americans were in extended line at the north side of the city. There are a number of U.S. Marine Corps and U.S. Army battalions with Iraqi battalions following them. And you can see there, they're all in extended line. They're all coordinated and linked in together. And as they started off on the 8th of November, breaking in and gaining lodgment into the north end of the city, they started to slowly work their way from north to south. But all of these battalions, as they went through, it wasn't easy, but they had to coordinate on their left and right to make sure that one battalion wasn't getting too far ahead of another, which was very difficult in some cases. And so by the 11th of November, they had gotten about halfway through the city. And then by the 15th of November, they got to the south end of the city. And then they turned around, and from the 15th of November to the 23rd of December, they went and cleared pockets of resistance to the city. But you see here, the Americans very much doing that swarm on the city, using several battalions in the front, and then using those Iraqi battalions to follow up behind them to clear any houses that they initially bypassed, because some of the battalions did penetrations and some of the battalions did thrusts. Well, there's a good example of a swarm. It's context driven, right? I mean, in this particular case, the Americans wanted to give the Iraqi battalion some experience, but they thought they're not experienced enough yet to actually clear the buildings. So if we bypass any buildings, we'll let the Iraqis clear those buildings. So this way they get some urban warfare experience. So that, in that particular context, to work. It all depends on how many resources you have and how many units you have. If you can have follow-up forces just clear the buildings behind you just to make sure they're clear, then that's great. But if you don't, then you have to assume some risk or change your operational plan in order to mitigate that risk. It's all context driven, and it all depends on how many resources. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was a good question, by the way. Good question.
Thank you. I'm getting better at it.
All right. Yeah, good. All right. So now I've shown you how units, sections, squads, platoons, combat teams, battalions, etc., how they move through a city. What happens when they actually get to their objective? Whether that objective is a subterranean system, it's a house, it's a building, it's a street, it's a city block, it's a suburb, it's the town, it's the city itself. These essential stages, what NATO doctrine calls essential stages, I call them phases. This is how you take your objective. And again, Doesn't matter if it's a platoon with a house, company or combat team with a large building, combat team with a city street, a battalion with a city block or a suburb, a brigade with a small town, a division with a large city. If you follow these 5 phases, I've seen these 5 phases throughout urban warfare history. You follow these 5 phases, then you'll be able to take your objective. So the first one is key. It's isolation of the objective physically and or with firepower, using firepower to fill in the gaps that you can't occupy physically, and on the electromagnetic spectrum, so that you cut the communications of your enemy off so that they can't talk to their friends on the outside of the house, the building, the street, the suburb, the town, the city. Isolate that objective physically and or with firepower on the electromagnetic spectrum, and you make the battle shorter. Why is that? Well, if you follow Sun Tzu, the great, Chinese military philosopher, Sun Tzu says, oh, you always leave a gap open. So this way your enemy sees the gap and they try to withdraw and fight another day. I love Sun Tzu. I read The Art of War every December as a Christmas gift to myself. Sun Tzu is not fighting the enemy. We're fighting nowadays. Remember at the beginning of this presentation, I said how the enemy wants to fight us in cities because of the complexities and challenges. So if you leave a gap open, the enemy's not going to withdraw. What they're going to do is they're going to reinforce and resupply. So this is why it's absolutely essential in urban operations that you isolate that objective physically and or with firepower and on the electromagnetic spectrum, because this way the enemy eventually runs out of stuff. They run out of people because you've killed them. They run out of ammunition. They run out of rations. They run out of water. They run out of medical supplies. So isolate the urban objective as best you can. It's not easy, especially in dense urban terrain. Like if you have cities with hundreds of thousands of buildings and they're all shoulder to shoulder, it is not easy to do. But if you can, you must try to isolate that objective as best you can. And this way you make the battle shorter. Leave a gap open, the enemy reinforces and resupplies, and now the battle goes longer, and you put more friendly bodies in the body bags because the enemy has more people, more ammunition, etc., etc. So isolate that objective. Second phase is breaking in and gaining lodgement. This is literally your foot in the door, pun intended. Okay, so whether it's a platoon getting into a building or a platoon getting into a house, a company getting into a building, a combat team getting into a building on a suburb or a street or a suburb, etc., or a battalion getting into a particular suburb. Okay, breaking in and gaining lodgement. This is where you get your foot in the door and you establish that base so that you can continue operations forward. Once you've done that, phase 3 is seizing key objectives: physical, symbolic, and tactical. Physical objectives, like an actual building or a bridge or a subterranean system that you have to physically occupy. A symbolic objective is like a government building, a church or a mosque, if the enemy is using it for military purposes. Something that is going to psychologically damage the enemy if you take possession of it. And then there's tactical objectives. Tall buildings that allow you to see through a lot of the urban terrain. A subterranean system that allows you to do an infiltration in behind the enemy. Those are tactical objectives. So during the intelligence preparation of that urban environment, your platoon, your combat team, your battalion, brigade, division commanders, they're identifying all of the objectives that are important to them so that they or their subordinate units can seize those objectives and allow them to have an advantage over the enemy. Finally, once you seize those key objectives, you clear remaining pockets of resistance. You may have to turn around and do that like they did at Second Battle of Fallujah. You clear pockets of resistance, and then finally you reorganize and consolidate. And the great thing about this NATO doctrine is that it does, again, like I said, doesn't matter if you're a platoon, company, combat team, battalion, brigade, division. Everybody can speak this language, but they're just doing each of these 5 phases at their own level. And it's absolutely brilliant. That's why I like the NATO doctrine. So as an example, what we're going to do is, this is 29 Palms Urban Operations Training Site. It's the Hue Military Operations and Urban Training Facility out in California that the United States Marine Corps uses. It's a very impressive facility. They've got hundreds and hundreds of CCAN buildings. They've got Notional River cutting through the middle of the city itself. And it's quite sizable. So let's say there's a division that's been tasked to take this particular piece of urban training, this particular city. And the division's coming in from the southeast corner. That's why you see those big blue arrows there. Now, the enemy are the red diamonds, and the blue stars are objectives that the division commander and his or her staff have identified that they have to take. And they're going to want their brigades to take those. So the first step, Corporal Aguirre, do you remember what that first step was? That first phase?
Isolate?
Isolate. So the division is going to use its own assets and probably some brigade assets as well to isolate this entire city. That's that red rectangle that you see around the edge of the city there. So they're going to isolate physically and or with firepower and on the electromagnetic spectrum the entirety of this urban operations training site. And then the second phase is the division's going to use its brigades to break in and gain lodgment at the southeast corner, the bottom right corner of the city. And then once the brigades have break in and gain lodgment, they can start moving their way through the city and seizing those key objectives, those blue stars that the division wants. And once the brigades have gotten to the northwest corner of the city, in this case, the top left part of the screen, once the brigades have gotten there, they can turn around and clear pockets of resistance. And then once they're done, they can reorganize and consolidate. So let's say this division has 4 brigades. Okay, so there's going to be 2 brigades going in first. Those 2 brigades will have to isolate their urban objectives. So you got a brigade on the right here, and then you got a brigade on the left, and they're going to isolate their objectives, and then they're going to break in and gain lodgment down in the southeast corner of the city. They've identified some key objectives as well, some blue stars, where those blue stars are. They're going to seize those key objectives. Once they get to this line halfway through the city, they're going to stop. They're going to clear any pockets of resistance, and they're going to reorganize and consolidate for phase 5. And then they're going to allow 2 more brigades to do a forward pass to the lines and then clear the rest of the city. And those 2 brigades do their 5 phases as well. Isolate, break in and gain lodgment, seize key objectives, clear pockets of resistance, reorganize and consolidate. So let's focus on this brigade right here. Let's say this brigade has 4 battalions, and it's going to have 2 battalions break in, and the brigade is going to isolate that part of the city. It's going to have its 2 battalions break in and gain lodgment, and those battalions are going to clear their objectives. They're going to get halfway through that AOR, area of responsibility. They're going to let 2 more battalions do a forward pass to the lines through, and then those 2 battalions follow their 5 steps. Okay, let's go to this battalion down here in the bottom left, or that we see in the center of the screen. This battalion, the company commander in this particular case, he or she is going to have a company. First of all, the battalion is going to isolate this objective as best they can, physically and or with firepower on the electromagnetic spectrum. And then this battalion commander is going to have 1 company break in and gain lodgment. That company is going to do its 5 phases. And then once that company is done, 2 more companies are going to do a forward pass to lines. And then each of these companies are going to do their 5 phases. Once they get to that line, now the battalion can have the companies clear pockets of resistance, reorganize, consolidate. Okay, we're going to go to this company up here in the top right. And this company commander is going to be using an alphanumeric method for identifying all the buildings. And so this company commander does the isolation of his or her objective, going to use the platoons to break in and gain lodgment into Alpha 2 and Alpha 3, respectively. The platoons are eventually going to fight their way through, seizing key objectives, whatever those objectives are to the company commander. They're going to clear pockets of resistance, reorganize, consolidate, tell the battalion commander so that all those other units can pass through. And then finally, the platoon commander is going to do the same thing. So let's say there's a platoon commander. That platoon commander is identified. Well, he or she's decided they're going to make a mouse hole on this wall. So that's a key objective. There's a stairwell inside the building, and there's a portion of the rooftop. So those are key objectives for this platoon commander. So this platoon commander isolates this objective. They break in and gain lodgment through the mouse hole. They seize key objectives. They clear pockets of resistance. They reorganize and consolidate. Platoon commander tells the company commander, so another platoon can pass through and attack into Alpha 2. That platoon commander does the 5 phases. Once that platoon's done, 3rd platoon passes through, and then does its 5 phases at Bravo 5. And now the company commander can continue pushing the platoons through the buildings as they work their way through, doing all 5 phases. So that basically, those 5, you can see Corporal Aguirre, how everybody's doing those 5 phases. They're just doing it at their own individual unit level. And that's why I like the NATO doctrine, because everybody's talking the same language, but just doing things at their own level. Any questions on that?
I think that was a really awesome way to conceptualize it, because then everybody at every level now kind of sees where they fit in the big machine there. So I appreciate that a lot, sir.
Yeah, cool. So let's say you get to that objective. Let's say you got a platoon attacking this house. Okay, so what I've seen throughout urban warfare history, this is my word, my name for it, I call it the pattern. And I see this with thrusts and swarms. I don't frequently. And when I mean precision conditions, I mean precision conditions like Second Battle of Fallujah, where they didn't destroy every building they went through. They could bypass, if they didn't take fire from a building, they bypassed it, let the Iraqis clear it afterwards. If you don't have to destroy it, don't destroy it. If you have to destroy it because you're taking fire from it, then destroy it, or destroy the enemy positions within it. That's precision conditions. High intensity conditions are like you're getting into every building because there's enemy literally in every building, and there's lots of firepower and destruction going on at the maximum level of urban violence. So with precision and high intensity conditions, if you follow this pattern, you can take your objective. Again, it doesn't matter if it's platoon, company, battle group, battalion, brigade, division. So first thing you do is you use close air support and or naval fire on that building, on that house, on that building, on that street, on that suburb. Close air support and naval fire first. And then you have indirect assets, artillery and mortars, launching rounds onto that house or that building. Make sure that there's no enemy on the rooftops or the top floor of the building. Hollywood movies would have us believe the artillery round is going to go right through every floor of the building and get right down to the basement. That's not true. A lot of urban terrain will absorb those rounds. So artillery rounds and mortars can clear the floor, or maybe the top floor of the rooftops, but you're not going to have rounds going all the way. You're going to make the enemy nervous on the main floor, I suppose, but you're not going to have the rounds going through all floors of a building. But close air support naval fire, followed by indirect fire, followed by direct fire from armor and artillery using their cannons in the direct fire role. That allows the infantry and the engineers to approach that building on the outside. Once the infantry and the engineers get to the building, the house, the building, whatever, then they can breach in. They can make that mouse hole. They can risk going through the doors and windows, although the enemy has those pre-sighted normally with soldiers with rifles, machine guns, or improvised explosive devices, or booby traps. So ideally, you're making mouse holes. Once they breach from the outside, the infantry and the engineers get into that building. Now they're clearing the inside of the building, while the armor and the artillery are looking down range and firing at other defensive positions, taking care of those until the infantry and engineers finish clearing that building, and then we're good to go. I see this pattern throughout urban warfare history, and it works. It really does work. And if you follow it, it does really well. Put maximum amount of violence and maximum amount of fire into those defensive positions, and you will achieve success. Any questions on that, Corporal Guerri?
No, sir.
Right on. All right. Now, the great thing about the NATO doctrine is that if you go to this particular doctrinal publication, ATP 99, NATO Urban Tactics, Chapter 4 actually gives you recommended groupings, tasks, and planning considerations for those 5 phases: the isolation, the break-in, engaging, lodgement, seize key objectives, clear pockets resistance, and reorganize, consolidate, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And it doesn't matter what level you're at, platoon, company, combat team, battalion, brigade, etc. Those groupings, tasks, and planning considerations are applicable to all levels. Now, ATP 99, NATO Urban Tactics, was rescinded a few years ago, and it's been replaced by NATO 3.2.1.2 operations in urban environment, but that publication is garbage. It's junk. So I always refer my students to ATP 99 because it's absolutely fantastic. So this way, it's like urban operations for dummies. You can actually read Chapter 4 and go, you sound like you know what you're talking about, because you're giving groupings, tasks, and planning considerations for each one of those 5 phases, which is brilliant. All right, Corporal Great. We're going to head now to the tactical defensive urban operations. Did you have any other questions, though? Any saved rounds from the offensive urban operations portion of the lecture?
No, I do not, sir. I've been learning a lot, sir, so thank you.
Okay, well, that's very nice of you to say. Okay, so tactical defensive urban operations. Okay, again, some other points. Okay, you're coming up with the overall plan. You're not the one defending the room. Again, I'm talking usually to platoon commanders, company commanders, battalion commanders, brigade commanders. Find the balance of your plan, simple but detailed and clear. Remember, the enemy is a living, thinking, sneaky bastard of a human being that reacts, right? That's not doctrine. That's Major Geroux. So the enemy is going to completely foul up your plan. And so just remain calm and have a backup plan. And then again, you're going to lose control of the situation. You've got troops, you got tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery, JTAC parties, all in the urban terrain all around you. You're not going to be able to see them. You might not be able to talk to them. You're not be able to hear them. So you're going to lose control of the situation. Try to regain control the best you can with comms, runners, whatever it is you have to do in order to make sure that you can give direction to your subordinates and vice versa. They can give you information. All right. So there's 3 overall defensive schemes of maneuver, and each of them with their pros and cons that I've seen throughout urban warfare history. The first one is building a number of fortified strong points. And I'm emphasizing strong points plural, is because I don't know if you've ever been on an urban operations exercise there, Corporal Great, but what happens is you get the engineers and the infantry out there a couple of days in advance, and they pick a house, and they go to that house, and they take tens of thousands of sandbags, and they take all kinds of barbed wire and concertina wire, and they make this house look impregnable, right? They basically, they do this to the house itself, right? And they point at it and they go, yes, this is what a fortified strong point looks like. This is what a fortified strong point looks like. So, Corporal Great, let me ask you a question. You spend hours or days helping out the engineers, because the infantry have to help out the engineers. They have to provide some labor there. And you put in tens of thousands of sandbags, and you reinforce this building, and you put all kinds of barbed wire and concertina wire on the windows so they can't throw grenades through, and on the outside so they can't approach the building. How tactical do you think that really is?
Well, you're giving away your position, so you're not that tactical, sir.
That's right. And the enemy nowadays has precision-guided munitions. And so what's probably going to happen is they're not stupid. They're going to do their intelligence preparation of the urban environment, and they're going to see that, and they're going to say, right, we're just going to throw a precision-guided munition, a PGM at it, and destroy it. You just spent hours or days building it, and now within 30 seconds, it's been destroyed. So I have a good friend of mine, Stu Lyle. He's the Urban Operations Research Lead for the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense Science Technology Laboratory, DSTL. Stu and I did a podcast with our good friend, John Spencer, who's the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point Military Academy. And Stu we were talking about urban strong points. And I thought this passage from Stu was absolutely brilliant. I think the main thing that I would try and stress to people is thinking about what does a fortified strong point look like from the outside. Camouflage, concealment, deception really come to the fore in this day and age where we've got precision-guided munitions. We've got thermal barracks that can be deployed by the attacking force. If you're attacking a fortified strong point today, you would just identify that. And it doesn't take a genius to do intelligence preparation of the battle space to recognize that that's going to be a threat. And then dropping a whole series of PGMs on it. We need to think about strong points in this day and age and update it to what the threat picture is today. And I love this next statement, making sure that the buildings you plan to defend don't look like buildings you're planning to defend, because they're going to be the first things that are then hit in terms of preparing the environment, shaping the environment in order to then allow the assault ground force to actually then move in. So I think that's a brilliant point. If you're going to defend a building, don't make it look like you're defending the building, right? So all that stuff about shoring up the ceilings to protect against the ceiling collapsing, all that was designed in an era when you were protecting the building against area fires, unguided area fires, or against light mortars that would actually strike the roof. I think in the modern era, when the threat has been escalated due to precision-guided munitions and UAVs, drones, we do need to think more about making sure the defensive preparations stay reasonably covert until the point where you as the defender decide to then initiate the contact. Just absolutely brilliant on Stu's part to bring that point up. during the presentation. So this is not going to work anymore. You can do some initial preparations, I'm sure. Back in October, my good friend, Warrant Officer Peter Vandermalen, with Patria, is also another passionate student of urban operations and an urban operations instructor. We were doing a 3-day seminar for a combat medic workshop here in Kingston. And we were told that we had to teach the medics how to build a fortified strong point so they could make a casualty collection point that was nice to fortify to protect the casualties. And I said to the colonel, Colonel, it's not going to work. Like, all this stuff, you're not going to do any of this. You're not going to do any of this because it just makes the building look obvious. Interior preparations. Well, yeah, you can do all that, but really all you need to do is just make a bunch of mouse holes and turn off all the gas sources so that you don't have any explosions, but don't do anything else because that's just going to make it obvious, right? Okay, you can prepare them as shelters. Well, you're not going to do any of this. And the main hazards are from falling masonry and from the building catching fire, but that's a result of indirect and direct fire weapons, which are more of a threat, I'll suggest, right? So if you make it look like a fortified strong point, it's just going to get destroyed that much quicker, and you've wasted all those resources. Now, Stu has also given me these graphics from some Second World War British doctrinal publications. Don't just make one strong point. I'm looking at the company commanders, the battalion commanders, or day commanders right now. Make a number of interlocking fortified strong points that can mutually support each other. And don't make them look like strong points, but have them as strong points so they can mutually support each other. This is back in the Second World War, and this is absolutely brilliant. This is what you need to do. Don't just make one fortified strong point and think that that's going to stop the enemy. It's not. You don't make it look like a strong point. Build it up if you have to protect your troopies. Once they initiate contact, they're going to have to withdraw out of that pretty quick based on the fact that there's UAVs and PGMs out there. And then make a number of fortified strong points so they're mutually supporting. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We've lost that. So if you want to know more, this is an actual shameful self-promotion. So anyway, John invited Stuart and I on to discuss urban strong points. And so if you go on to the Modern War Institute at West Point Urban Warfare Project podcast, you can find that Urban Strong Points podcast. We're good to go. All right. So the other scheme maneuver is doing a mobile defense. And a mobile defense is obviously moving back from building to building to building through some training systems as well. You're giving up urban terrain. But what you're doing is you're trying to absorb the enemy's attack. They're going to have to use resources to clear all these buildings as a training system. So doing a mobile defense means you're destroying the enemy, but you're moving backwards, withdrawing from building to building to building to do that. Or you can see a combination of both of the above, which is what I frequently see throughout urban warfare history, where you use fortified strong points and a mobile defense. So the essential stages, and again, it doesn't matter if you're a platoon, company combat team, battalion battle group, brigade, division, whatever. Doesn't matter what you do. If you follow these phases, I see these phases throughout urban warfare history, then you're pretty much good to go. So there's a perimeter force battle, a disruption force battle, a main defensive area, and a reserve. Now, this is NATO doctrine. I don't like the fact that phase 4 is the reserve. I'm going to explain why later on, really, because you would use the reserve during any of these other first 3 phases. You wouldn't just use a reserve at the very end of the battle. You would probably use it. You could use it during the perimeter force battle, disruption force battle of the MDA. And now you may not have enough resources to conduct all these phases, so the commanders have to assess that risk. So let's talk about the perimeter force battle. What is it? It's the edge of your area of operations within the urban area. It could be the edge of a city, or if your platoon, company, combat team, battle group is further into the city, it's the edge of your area of operations, which means you've probably got a unit in front of you. And you got units to the side and flanks, and you've probably got units behind you as well. So the perimeter force is the edge of your area of responsibility. What is it? It's going to be a force that initially identifies the enemy axis of advance. It's going to identify the enemy main effort. Maybe it wants to lure the enemy into the disruption zone. It's going to initially trip maybe enemy recce. It's going to trip the forward forces of the enemy. This is what it does, and these are what the tasks are. Who is it? It's up to you. It all depends on who you are as a commander and what unit you command. For a platoon commander, it could be, I don't know, a group or a section. The platoon commander will figure that out. For a company or combat team commander, it could be a section or two sections or a platoon. Again, the combat team commander will figure that out. A battalion commander might use a platoon or a company or two companies, whatever. It all depends on the size of the unit and after they've done their planning, who they decide is going to be that perimeter force. And I've already talked about the main tasks. The disruption force happens behind the perimeter force, but is in front of the main defensive area. So that disruption force, like the disrupt task, it's going to disrupt the enemy as it's advancing. It's going to attrit some of the enemy. It's going to lure the enemy into a certain area, into the main defensive area. It's between that perimeter force and that main defensive area. Who is it? It all depends on who you are as a commander in your unit. Again, a platoon commander can make it a group or a section. A company combat team commander can make it a section or a platoon. A battalion commander can make it a platoon or a company. Again, it all depends. And so, and I've already talked about the tasks. Then you have the main defensive area. This is where you are tasked to either destroy a majority of the enemy or you're tasked to stop the enemy. Now, if you've got another unit behind you preparing for their urban defensive battle, maybe you're only going to attrit X percentage of the enemy, and then you're going to do a rearward passes alliance to the unit behind you so they can start their perimeter force battle. But this is where you're definitely going to destroy a majority of the enemy that you've been tasked to destroy, or you're going to stop the enemy altogether if that happens to be your task, right? So that's what it is. Who is it? Again, it depends on your level, whether platoon, combat team, battalion commander, whatever. You decide based on the resources that you have. And then finally, the reserve. Like I said, what is it? This is obviously, let's say your perimeter force is not doing a good job of attriting or shaping the enemy, then you can throw your reserve up there. Your disruption force isn't doing a good job with the disruption force battle. It was flanked by the enemy. Maybe you want to throw the reserve up there. Your main defensive area, maybe the enemy popped up in a subterranean system you didn't know about. You could throw your reserve over there to help stifle that attack from the flank or whatever. So that's what that reserve does. And it can be used during any one of those three other phases. It's not necessarily the fourth phase, as NATO seems to imply, because it's number 4 on their phase list. So, any questions on that, Hoplagwiri?
I'm still trying to conceptualize the difference between the perimeter force battle and the disruption force battle. Is there something that can easily distinguish them? Or maybe the visualization will help.
That's a good question. That's where your control measures come into place, right? Okay, one section, you're going to be my perimeter force, and you're going to fight, in this area of the city. Once you cross that boundary, you're going to do rear passes the lines through the disruption force, which is going to be my other section. And then I've got my third section in my main defensive area as a platoon commander. So put those control measures into place, and you can clearly delineate where the perimeter force is, where the disruption force is, where the MDA is. I'm going to show you. Let me show you 29 Palms, and I'll give you an example of that. So, for example, here's the division commander is going to defend Hue Mount City site in 29 Palms, and the division commander has his or her perimeter force at the southeast corner of Hue City. They've got their disruption force in the middle, and they've got their main defensive area up in the northwest corner, the top left hand of the screen. This division commander has 3 brigades. Each brigade commander has decided to emulate, in this particular case, the division commander scheme of maneuver, where they have, let's say, each brigade is going to have a battalion doing a perimeter force, 2 battalions doing perimeter force, a battalion doing a disruption force, and then another battalion back at the main defensive area. Let's say each brigade commander does that, just in this particular example. So let's go to this middle brigade. This middle brigade commander, as I mentioned, 2 battalions are involved in this brigade commander's perimeter force battle. Another battalion will do the disruption force, and another battalion is back here at the main defensive area. So let's go down to this corner, the southeast corner. Here's those 2 battalions. Okay, so you got 2 battalions, and the battalion commander has selected his or her perimeter force. Maybe a platoon or a company will do that, then another company will do a disruption force, and then 2 companies backed by that battalion's MDA. And this battalion commander will choose his or her scheme of maneuver as well. Platoon or company, platoon or company, platoon or company. Once they're done their fight, they're going to do a rearward passes lines through the battalion behind them, so that this battalion can start their defensive battle with their perimeter force, their disruption force, their MPA. Okay, we'll go to this battalion here in the center, right there. And this battalion commander has 2 companies forward, let's say. So the company left forward, this company commander has chosen these buildings for the perimeter force battle, whether that's a section or platoon, it's up to that company commander. A disruption force battle, an MVA. This company commander has done the same thing. And let's say there's another company behind as the battalion reserve that can come up and, can support with these other 2 companies. Okay, this particular company here, let's say this company commander, he or she's decided to put 3 platoons forward, assuming some risk, not going to have a reserve platoon, going to put 3 platoons forward. Each platoon commander has picked his or her own building for a perimeter force battle, their own buildings for a disruption force battle, their own buildings for a main defensive area. And then once these platoons finish their MDA, they're going to tell the company commander. Company commander is going to tell the battalion commander can tell the brigade commander, et cetera, what's going on. So I'll give you a historical, before I go to Ortona as a historical example, Corporal Aguirre, do you have any questions on that?
No, sir.
Right on. So let's go to the Battle of Ortona, where the German defensive plan was like mirroring the doctrine that I was just talking about. It was doctrine before it was doctrine. So this map comes from Mark Zuelke's well-known book on the Battle of Ortona. I'm just using it for this presentation. So I'm talking about the Germans and their defense plan. That's my best German accent. That's all I can do. Corporal, I'm sorry, that's all I can do. That's my best German accent for you. So in this particular case, the Germans, their perimeter force battle was actually at the south end of the city. That's that red rectangle that you see there. Then their disruption force battle, what they did was Highway 16, which cuts through the middle of Ortona, they left that invitingly open and they rubbled. They destroyed a lot of the buildings on the side streets to create these huge rubble piles so that the Canadians couldn't flank the Germans by using all the side streets. So their perimeter force battles at the south end of the city, their disruption force battle, they're going to suck the Canadians up Highway 16 through the middle of the city. And then once they get to where the 4 piazze, the 4 squares are at the north end of the city, that's their main defensive area. That's where they're bound and determined to destroy the Canadians and stop their advance. And then in the railway tunnel at the north end of the city, they have their reserves, and they can feed their reserves into the perimeter force battle, the disruption force battle, or the main defensive area at any time during the fight. Originally, it was the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment involved in the defense, but then the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Regiment showed up, became the reserve, and then it was thrown into the fight as well to try to stop the Canadians. And Ortona has these 5 piazze, these 5 squares. At the south end, Piazza Vittoria, which is that photo in the bottom right. The northwest, here's Piazza San Francisco, Dead Horse Square, that I talked about earlier. That belonged to the Seaforths. Piazza Municipale, Piazza Plebiscita, and Piazza San Tommaso. So these 5 squares were the main killing zones that the Germans had, and they had machine guns, rifles, anti-tank guns surrounding these squares there, in the buildings surrounding these squares, and that's where they wanted to try to destroy the Canadians. Very fortunately, the Canadians were using good combined arms tactics, and were using those 5 phases in order to eventually destroy the Germans and push them out of the city. All right. Very much, again, the NATO doctrinal publication, ATP 99, for all of these phases, they have recommended groupings, tasks, and planning considerations, urban operations for dummies, so that you can stand in front of your troopies and you can sound like you know what you're talking about, because they've got recommended groupings, tasks, and planning considerations for the perimeter force battle, disruption force battle, main defensive area, and the reserve. And then finally, in Canadian doctrine, we have the 6 supporting plans, right? Direct fire, indirect fire, counter moves, I-star, obstacle, and sustainment. So those 6 supporting plans are baked into those phases as part of your overall defensive plan for the urban area. So we'll go and move to a conclusion now. All right, so when I'm teaching urban operations and my students, my senior NCOs, and my junior officers, senior officers are coming up with their cunning plans based on these tactical exercises without troops, these TOOTs, I always tell them, look, make sure you're talking the doctrinal language. I've had students say to me, okay, Jay, okay, Major Geroux, we're going to move from here to here, and we're going to destroy it. I'm like, what are you doing? Are you doing a thrust? Are you doing a penetration? Oh, we're thrusting. Okay, good. Now I know you're clearing buildings en route. Okay, we're going to use a combination of fortified strong points and mobile defense in order to conduct the urban defense. Thank you very much. Talk the doctrinal language. And because everybody's talking the doctrinal language, everybody understands what you're saying immediately, and you don't have to explain it in detail. I'm doing a thrust. I'm doing a penetration. It's going to be fortified strong points. Okay, got it. Good to go. When you have enablers, pay them forward. Okay, in urban operations, you've got the enemy in the next room. You got the enemy down the hall. You've got the enemy across the street. You've got the enemy in the next building. Okay. Okay. The section and the platoon and the combat team commanders and the battalion commanders cannot wait 30, 45 minutes, an hour and a half for that brigade or that division asset to come down the street and eventually fire on that building, because by the time it's done that, the enemy's probably withdrawn from the building or snuck away through that subterranean system. So all the enablers have to be punched forward. So battalion commanders, I want you to push your snipers up to the combat team commanders, the company commanders, even the platoon commanders. Okay, air defense guns, I want them forward. Okay, they're usually a brigade or a division asset. I want those air defense guns forward. Tanks can only elevate their cannons so high, but air defense guns can elevate them only 90 degrees, because they're trying to shoot down aircraft. And if you have defensive positions on the 14th floor of that building, those air defense guns will be able to shoot at those. Okay, engineers, forward. I want to see one section of engineers with every platoon, a troop of engineers with every company. Armor, forward. Okay, I know the armor folks like to work in troops of tanks of 4, but in urban operations, those tanks need to be forward so that they can put fire down range. Okay, the key to pushing all these enablers forward is that the infantry and the engineers and the artillery and the armor have to form a symbiotic relationship of protection. I don't want to see the tank forward and the troopies doing the conga line behind the tank, because neither one of them are being protected that way. The enemy could just sneak up to a building and fire at the tank or shoot at the troops behind the tank. So ideally, you want the troops 50, 75, 100 meters in front of the tank, depending on the density of the urban terrain, preferably inside the buildings, because I've been in front of a tank when it's fired its cannon, and it kind of shook my noggin, and it wasn't really good. So if the troops are in front of the tank, they're looking to make sure that nothing's going to pop out of those windows to destroy the tank. And the tank is firing down range at enemy defense positions that they're able to spot, right? It's that symbiotic relationship protection. So if you got snipers, air defense guns, engineers, armor, artillery forward, infantry, protect those things so that they can destroy the enemy, so that by the time you get there, the enemy position is destroyed and you have to shoot less bullets, right? So that's that symbiotic relationship protection that you have to, that the infantry has to support all those enablers when they're being pushed forward. The Canadians did this at Ortona very well, and the Americans did this at Aachen, the Battle of Aachen in October 1944 really well, where it was that symbiotic relationship protection as they advanced. Infantry and engineers have to protect the enablers. This is the Russian armored column that went into Kharkiv during the first days of the Battle of Ukraine. Now, the Russians' doctrine, urban operations doctrine, they always try to push armored columns into the center of the city to try to take the center of the city first. But there's a risk to that. Most of the time, it has worked for the Russians, but in this particular case, because the Ukrainians actually fought back, they were actually able to destroy these armored columns. So that's why infantry and engineers protect the armor, the artillery, the air defense, and all those other enablers that are forward with you. Okay, sustainment. Lots of ammunition, lots of water, and caches close to the urban area. Okay, now I'm going to give you some numbers, Popol Aguirre, and I want you to use these numbers as start states only. Okay, only for planning purposes. You have to do a good intelligence preparation of the operational environment, of the urban environment, to come up with the real numbers. But if you need start state numbers, you can use these for now. So casualties, because of the density of the urban terrain, because concrete, brick, stone, steel, glass, and wood is harder on the human body than dirt, because of the close quarter combat, because the enemy's literally in the next room and they're shooting through walls, due to the walls collapsing on soldiers, due to the mental health casualties, because it's close quarter combat. So you're choking enemy soldiers to death with your bare hands, or stabbing them with bayonets, or shooting them in the face when you're right in front of them. A lot of mental health casualties. So the casualties, you can incur 3 to 6 times the amount of casualties in urban warfare than you would in other environments. Most of those casualties I found throughout urban warfare happen to the defenders. The attackers usually have less casualties than the defenders do, but both sides can incur a number of casualties. So during the Second World War, casualty rates were anywhere from 2 to 5%. So for every 100 soldiers going into a fight, you had 2 to 5 killed, wounded, or missing in action. In urban warfare, even if you're doing everything right, because of all these challenges and complexities, you could have 40, figures 40% casualties, even if you're doing everything right. There are some rifle companies in the Second Battle of Fallujah that suffered 40% casualties. And the Americans were doing a lot of good things at Fallujah. They were doing a lot of the right things at Fallujah, and yet they still suffered 40% casualties. So 3 to 6 times the amount of casualties. Plan for that. And so this way you can get the medical supplies and the medics and all of the medical facilities on board so that you're good to go. Ammunition, 4 times the amount of ammunition. Concrete, brick, stone, steel. That's a lot harder to destroy than dirt, right? And so you can go through a lot of small arms ammunition, a lot of tank ammunition, artillery ammunition. Engineers are going to go through a lot of explosives. I see it throughout urban warfare history. There's a whole lot more ammunition being used because those defensive positions are inside buildings or in subterranean systems, and they're hard to destroy. Again, do a good intelligence preparation in the urban environment. You might need 8 times the amount of ammunition. You might need 16 times the amount. Do the IPOE of the urban environment to determine how much ammunition you need. And then finally, rations and water. Our bodies consume, on a regular day, 2,000 calories in order to do our normal routine. In urban operations, especially dismounted infantry and engineers, they will go through 5,000 calories a day. They're running across streets. They're crawling through subterranean systems. They're boosting their buddies through doors and windows, going up ladders. They're running down hallways. You use a lot more calories fighting in urban operations, 5,000 calories per day. So that means you're going to need 1.5 times more rations and water. So 3 IMP meals per day is 3 military rations per day is not good enough. You're going to need 8 or 9 military rations per day. And Cobra Guerre, nobody's going to eat 8 or 9 military rations per day. So commanders and sustainers, you have to bring in fresh rations at least once a day because fresh rations have more calories than our military rations do. 1 camelback of water per soldier per day, not good enough. 3 camelbacks of water per soldier per day. It's very hungry and thirsty work. So if you're a logistician right now, or you're a Section 2IC, or a platoon warrant, or a sergeant major, or a company 2IC, where your role is sustainment and logistics, you're starting to think, holy Christ, 3 to 6 times the amount of casualties, 4 times the amount of ammunition, and 2.5 times the rations and water. That's a lot of trucks, and that's a lot of drivers, and it's got to be all protected, and it's all got to be brought up to the front lines. How are you going to do that? Okay. The Americans at Aachen had these commodity points that were 2 or 3 city blocks behind the frontline troops, and they had these M29 Weasels, which were these small tracked vehicles where they can put the bullets and the beans in, run those forward, and then put the casualties in them and run the casualties back. Okay, the Americans in the Battle of Najaf in August 2004, same thing, commodity points, and they did this for Second Battle of Fallujah as well. Commodity points with millions and millions of rounds, small arms ammunition, and grenades, and anti-armor weapons, etc. And those commodity points would follow the troops as they were working their way through. And they were only 2 or 3 city blocks behind, and they were following the troops as they worked through. So this way, they didn't have to go back too far to get more ammunition. Okay, ISIS fighters in Mosul, when they were on the defense, what they would do is they would mark their sustainment points by having a brick tied to a rope, and that would hang outside of a window. And if it was a rope with 2 bricks, that was a fortified strong point. So in the chaos and violence of urban battle, they could turn around and go, okay, I need ammunition. Oh, there's an ammo cache right there because that's got, a brick hanging on a rope outside of a window. And so after a while, the coalition started identifying those buildings. Okay, these buildings are weapons caches. These buildings are fortified strong points. We know now because we understand the marking system that they're using. So you have to really build up your sustainment. You have to build up your consumables because you'll be going through a lot of it. And that's why I like this quote from General Hal Moore. Do you know what General Hal Moore is? Okay, so General Hal Moore, he was a battalion commander with 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry of the 1st Air Cavalry Division in the Vietnam War. He fought at the Battle of Ia Drang in November of 1965. Normally, when I ask Americans this question, who General Hal Moore is, they all yell, Mel Gibson, because Mel Gibson played General Moore when he was the battalion commander at that particular battle in the movie We Were Soldiers, which is based on General Moore's book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. Right? So I like General Moore's quotation here. Battle soldiers run on adrenaline, quick reflexes, discipline, and water, water, water. Right? And I put in lots of good ammo and good training too. So, Corporal Guerrieri, I can't stress this enough. You're going to need a lot of ammunition and a lot of water and a lot of ammunition and a lot of ammunition and water and ammunition and water and ammo and water and ammo, lots of small arms, lots of grenades. The Loyal Edmonton Regiment would give 15 grenades daily to each infantry soldier so they could fight the Battle of Ortona. Lots of ammo and water and ammo and water and water and water and ammunition and water and ammo. And Corporal Guerrieri, just in case you don't get it, you need lots of ammunition, lots of water, and lots of rations and lots of medical supplies. Okay, so I'm just trying to drive the point home, right? Thrust and swarms, this is the pattern. I was talking about that pattern earlier, right? Close air and naval support, indirect fire, followed by direct fire, armored artillery firing while the infantry and engineers approach the objective. Infantry and engineers breach the building. Infantry and engineers clear the building. The Americans did it at Aachen. Canadians did it at Ortona. The Americans did it at Aachen. The Americans did it during the Battle of Seoul, during the Korean War, and the Israeli Defense Force always does it. And I've seen this pattern over and over again throughout our warfare history, how to clear objectives, how to approach and clear objectives, and it works. It's brilliant. Isolation of the objective always works. It always shortens the battle. Doesn't matter what size you are. Like I mentioned, their army group to platoon. If you can, physically and or with firepower and on the electromagnetic spectrum, if you can, try to isolate the objective. It is not easy based on dense urban terrain and subterranean systems. It is not easy. The Germans at Stalingrad could not do this. Again, Stalingrad rests on the west side of the Volga. The Germans couldn't get across the Volga. They tried to use close air support and artillery to destroy the boats and the watercraft that were coming across the Volga that were sustaining the Russians in the defensive fight. But it was very difficult for the Germans to do that. If you watch the battle Enemy at the Gates, based on the book, that's the movie where all the Russians are played by British actors and all the Germans are played by American actors. So at the very beginning of that movie, you see Jude Law, who plays Russian sniper Vasily Zaitsev, going across on one of those boats while the close air support and the artillery strikes are hitting all the boats as they're crossing the Volga River. But the Germans couldn't isolate the Russians at Stalingrad because the Russians had the capability of feeding bullets and beans across the Volga. And so that's one of the many reasons why the Germans lost this battle. Okay, the Canadians at Ortona could not isolate the city either. There's a large ravine off to the west. There's a large ditch off to the north. And then there's a large cliff in the Adriatic Sea off to the east of Ortona. So that means the Canadians had to attack Ortona from the south. They couldn't flank the city at all. So when I was officer commanding the counter improvised explosive devices cell down at the tactics school, I had a geomatics technician working for me, Corporal Guerrieri, and they've got some fantastic military mapping programs. And this is a very modern shot satellite photo of Ortona. But what you can do is a cross section where you put a blue line down, and then it gives you a cross section of the terrain. And you can see here that Ortona actually rests on a cliff. It's got that ravine off to the west and the fosso, the ditch, and then the cliffs in the Adriatic Sea off to the east. And as you go from north to south, you can see the ravine and the cliffs don't get, less steep or less deep, right? So as you get to the south side of the city there. So because Ortona rests on that plateau, the Canadians couldn't flank it. And so eventually the division commander, Major General Chris Boakes, had to throw the 1st and the 3rd Brigades, 3rd Canadian Infantry Brigades, up the west side of that ravine to try to isolate the city from the north. And once they started to threaten that, that's when the Germans eventually pulled out of Ortona. The Americans at Aachen located right there, the first large city that was liberated, taken by the Allies. The Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division, working with the 30th Infantry Division, they almost isolated the entire city. There was one small little gap there for several days that the Germans were allowed to feed reinforcements or resupplies through. But once the Big Red One isolated that entire city, that doomed the Germans within the city itself, and they eventually surrendered because they just ran out of personnel and ammunition and water and rations. And a couple of battles. The Americans did a lot of really good things at the Battle of Ockett. They did a lot. Their operational plan and their tactics, techniques, and procedures were really, really switched on, really good at the Battle of Ockett. The Americans at the Battle of Hue, though, had some challenges. Remember, I mentioned the Tet Offensive, where the North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, launched that huge offensive that attacked over 40 cities, towns, installations throughout South Vietnam. While the 4th NVA Regiment was in New Hue and the 6th NVA Regiment was in Old Hue, the 5th North Vietnamese Army Regiment was actually northwest of Hue, and they were actually literally holding the door open where they could reinforce and resupply communist forces inside the city. And it took the Americans about a month and a half, and it took 4 U.S. Army battalions who were fighting elsewhere and had to be brought into this fight. It took 4 U.S. Army battalions to eventually destroy the 5th NVA Regiment and eventually close in on Hue itself. And once they actually got close to the city, that's when the North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, withdrew from the city because they realized now that their sustainment had been cut off because the city had been isolated. The Russians in Grozny, when they came up with their original plan, they did not isolate the city at all. As a result, the Chechens were able to go in and out of the city at will. The Americans in the Second Battle of Fallujah completely isolated the city physically, and it was firepower, and so absolutely brilliant. So they were able to stop any reinforcements and resupplies from coming into the city. The Russians in Ukraine, initially they failed. When they tried to attack Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy, they did not isolate the city at all. All the red stains are where Russia was, but I choose my words deliberately there. And then same with Kharkiv and Severodonetsk, because the Russians didn't isolate those cities, the Ukrainians were able to reinforce and resupply. Did the same at Bakhmut as well. The Russians were able to isolate Mariupol, not because of any operational brilliance on their part, but because there weren't a lot of Ukrainian forces down in that part of the country, and because you have the Sea of Azov that's on the south side of Mariupol. So once the Russians were able to isolate Mariupol physically and with firepower, it pretty much doomed the Ukrainians inside the city, and it turned out to become an 89-day siege at the Azovstal steel facility. And the Ukrainians, these brave Ukrainians, held out for 89 days after being completely surrounded by the Russians in Mariupol. Just absolute warriors on their part. And they were ordered to surrender by President Zelensky, and they still wanted to keep on fighting. So, but once the Ukrainians tried to resupply the city through some very daring helicopter missions. And my good friend John Spencer was able to interview one of those helicopter pilots on a podcast for the Urban Warfare Project. But absolutely daring on their part. All right, snipers, friendly. Worth their weight in gold. Remember I said earlier, commanding officers, battalion commanding officers, make sure you push your snipers right down to the combat team, company, but platoon levels even, if necessary. I understand that they may want to have a couple teams for themselves, but if your battalion commanding officer doesn't push those snipers forward, then company commanders designate, sharpshooters or marksmen in your companies or platoons. The Russians did this to Stalingrad and killed hundreds of German soldiers. The Israeli Defense Force always does this. They always have snipers. And the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the Filipino soldiers there during the Battle of Marawi, their snipers are absolutely fantastic in destroying enemy positions. But you do have to remember that they are only human. So we like to think of snipers as 10 feet tall and bulletproof. But they are only human. And in fact, when we talk about the snipers in the Battle of Marawi, some of those snipers actually suffered from very severe physical and or psychological challenges because they were either in the fight for so long and or they had killed so many Islamic State insurgents that it took a toll on their mental health. So it's always important, not only as snipers actually, but, with all your troops, your infantry troops, your engineers. Remember, this is very physically and mentally demanding work, urban warfare, and your troops are going to tire out quite easily. So you gotta rest in the evenings, or you gotta rotate out your troops as much as you can. And that includes your snipers. As much as we like to think they're 10 feet tall and bulletproof, they're not. But they're going to be overtasked because they are in a target-rich environment. And so you need to give them their mental health breaks and their physical breaks as well. Enemy snipers will definitely kill your momentum. You can imagine, you're dismounted infantry engineers, you're around the corner of that building, boom, suddenly, Corporal What's-His-Pickle drops. Another soldier rounds the building, boom, Corporal What's-Her-Pickle too drops. Soldiers, enemy snipers will carry your momentum. And so you have to have proactive plans on how to deal with them. Either you have firepower on standby, whether it's tanks, armored personnel carriers, anti-armor weapons, you withdraw, you flank, you throw lots of smoke. You have snipers acting as counter sniper teams. Have a proactive plan on how to deal with snipers. Don't come up with something after the enemy snipers start dropping your troops. By then, it's too late. You have to have a proactive plan. The Russians did not have a proactive plan during the first Battle of Grozny. And as a result, they lost dozens and dozens of soldiers to Chechen marksmen and snipers and sharpshooters. So have that proactive plan. Civilians, don't wish away the civilians. Throughout my urban warfare historical research, I find that about 10%, more or less, of an urban population will stay in a city. They have nowhere else to go. They don't want the very mean Canadians to take all our personal possessions. Maybe I can just wait in the basement and have the urban storm pass overhead. 10% of an urban population will stay within a city, and you cannot wish this problem away. You just can't assume the civilians are going to leave. Try to do everything you can before the urban battle to have them leave the city. That would be great. But you will find civilians in the urban environment as you're fighting through that urban battlefield. Have a proactive plan so that when you run into them, you can safely put them on an armored vehicle or escort them out of that particular part of the urban battlefield and back into another building where they're safe. And eventually you can get them back to, a refugee camp or another building that's been designated as a refugee area. Don't wish this problem away. Don't make the assumption the civilians are just going to leave on their own. Don't just say to them, oh, keep walking that way. Somebody back there cares. They won't. As soon as they hear that artillery round go off or that tank round go off or that burst of machine gun fire, they're going to run into that building and they're still your problem. So I was teaching on the combat team commanders course, and we had the infantry company sergeant majors course co-located with us at the Normandy building at CFB Gagetown. And I was listening to, we were doing our toots in downtown Fredericton, and I had my students back brief me, and there was one warrant officer who was acting as the company sergeant major. He was back briefing the sustainment plan. Very good sustainment plan, bullets and beans forward, casualties to the rear. That was great. And one of my deliverables was have a proactive plan on when you meet civilians in the urban battlefield. The warrant officer didn't have one. And at the end of his back brief, I said, good plan, warrant, bullets and beans forward, casualties to the rear, but I didn't hear what your proactive plan was for civilians. Then there was this awkward silence. Warrant officer had a deer caught in the headlights kind of look. I went, warrant, do you have a proactive plan for civilians? It's okay, so they're just going to leave. And I'm like, well, no, warrant, they're not just going to leave. Remember my back briefs, my lectures, and it was one of the deliverables. My deliverables for you is to have the proactive plan for civilians because you're going to run into them. Oh no, sir, you're wrong. They're just going to leave. And I was like, I didn't have to say anything because there was a master warrant officer who was part of the infantry school standards cell, and he was the standards sergeant major for the urban officer instructors course, and he launched on the warrant officer up and down one side of him. And he's like, you don't disagree with Major Geroux. He's right. There's going to be civilians there in battlefield. You got a proactive plan. And I'm like, okay, Sergeant Major, we're good. Like, thanks for the sporting fires. We're good. But, it just proves the point. Like, don't wish the problem away. So the Americans in Aachen had a proactive plan when they ran into civilians. They actually physically put them on trucks and they drove them down to a German barracks in Brand, which is about 5 kilometers southeast of Aachen itself. And they put them in the barracks and they gave them food and medical attention. And the men were allowed to go out and do some farming to bring more food in. And the ladies stayed and cleaned the barracks and they cooked the food, etc. So the Americans had a very good proactive plan on what to do when they ran into civilians in that urban battlefield. The Russians in Grozny did not. As a result, they ran into, dozens of Russian civilians and Chechen civilians who needed their help. And at Mosul, because the Islamic State was using civilians as human shields. On the 17th of March, there was this horrible accident where there was either a close air support strike or it was an improvised explosive device factory that was struck and 200 civilians were killed. And these were the photos that went out on media. And I've got 2 beautiful daughters at home, and this photo just kills me to see children like that have been killed. So don't wish this problem away. Civilians will be in the urban battle space, have a proactive plan on how to get them out safely enough. All right. Urban operations allows for lots of initiative and be imaginative and think evil, but still follow the rules of engagement and the laws of armed conflict. So again, the urban training allows for some good initiatives. I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was teaching on the Combat Team Commanders course, and we were doing the toot in downtown Fredericton, it was November, it was minus 15 degrees Celsius out, it was very cold, and the major was back briefing me on his plan, and he said, Jay, I'm going to open all the doors and windows and make the inside of the building absolutely frozen cold because it's minus 15 out, and I'm going to pour water all over the stairs. I'm like, okay, why are you doing that? He goes, because there's nothing in the law of armed conflict that says I can't pour water on the stairs and make the stairs slippery so that when the bad guys try to run up the stairs, they fall down and hurt themselves. And I'm just going to make mouse holes through the ceilings with rope ladders, and that's how I'm going to go up and down. Now, you can debate the efficacy of that, if that's going to work or not. But at least, he was thinking outside the box. I had a warrant officer who was like, sir, we're on the defense. I'm going to issue all of my troops those camping straws. I'm like, okay, what are you doing that for, warrant? He goes, well, I don't want to have to haul all this water up. So what I'll do is I'll tell all the troops, fill all the sinks and the bathtubs with water. If you run out of water in your camelback, you can just, fill your camelback up with water from the water in the sinks and the bathtubs. And if that doesn't work, whip out your camping straws with the built-in filters and just suck up the water from the sink and the bathtub. And then when you get out of the building, just pull the plug so the enemy doesn't have any water resources. And I'm like, all right. Like, again, you can discuss whether that would be successful or would work or not. I guess you can have a debate about that, but, good initiative from the warrant officer there. All right. Enemy lock stats. Remember the dense urban terrain. There's buildings, there's subterranean systems. The enemy could be 50 meters away from you. You're not going to know where they are. So it's going to be impossible to know where all those enemy soldiers are or where they're located. So be proactive. Think like the enemy. If I was attacking me, where would I go? How would I infiltrate in? Where would I do a flanking? How could I come up? Could they come up behind me somehow? And have a contingency plan, a con plan to deal with that unexpected counterattack. And have con plans built into the last phase of your scheme maneuver. Again, I'm looking at the platoon, company, battalion, brigade commanders. Have some con plans built into the last phase of your scheme maneuver that'll help you deal with the unexpected. And if you fail in urban operations, it proves you're too stupid to read a book or 2 at 12. Like, there are thousands of resources out there. I'm going to show them in a minute. There are thousands of resources out there that allows you to get smart on urban operations. There's readings, there's books, there's articles, there's podcasts. So get yourself smart on it because it's the combat you more likely will be conducting in the future. All right. So I started this presentation off with an excerpt from the introduction of Colonel Lou DeMarco's book, Concrete Hell. I bookend it with an excerpt from his conclusion. Colonel Lou's got it right. Urban warfare is becoming more prevalent. We still have to train to fight in any and all environments, rural, Arctic, jungle, mountain, desert. But again, given the trends, it's important that we start focusing more and more on urban warfare and urban operations because the global population is becoming more urbanized. Our enemies understand the complexities and the challenges of this environment. Cities have become strategic objectives. And you can imagine what would happen if the enemy parachuted in and took Ottawa, right? Some people probably wouldn't care, but our senior politicians would be like, hey, Canadian Armed Forces, that's the capital city of Canada. Go get that back. And so we would be tasked to go and get Ottawa back, right? So we have to start focusing more and more on urban operations and urban warfare. Okay, so it's not homework, but it is homework. Again, I was talking about all those resources that are out there that can help you get smart on urban operations. So ATP 99 in the top left corner, that's that rescinded urban operations doctrinal publication. Absolutely fantastic, like Urban Operations for Dummies. I'm at the Army Doctrine Center, Canadian Army Doctrine Training Center headquarters in Kingston, and I just finished rewriting one of the very sizable urban operations doctrinal publication there. that's meant for platoon, company, battalion, brigade commanders. That draft copy of that is still waiting to be approved. My good friends, Liam Collins and John Spencer, again, John being the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point, took a bunch of his podcasts, and him and Liam transcribed those podcasts into chapters and put them in this book called Understanding Urban Warfare. Absolutely fantastic read. John and Liam very kindly let me read the book ahead of time, act as kind of like an editor. And they also very kindly put a chapter. I did a Ortona podcast with John, and John very kindly put the one of the chapters as our podcast on Ortona. I referenced Colonel Lou DeMarco's Concrete Hell, Urban Warfare from Stalingrad to Iraq. Absolutely fantastic book. I recommend it for amateur and professional students of urban operations alike. Colonel Lou has got a number of chapters on there: Battle of Stalingrad, Aachen, Seoul, the French in Algiers, the British in Northern Ireland, Battle of Quay, First Grozny, the Israeli Defense Force in Jenin and Nablus, and finally the Americans in Ramadi in 2006. A number of case studies, and he talks about the tactics, techniques, and procedures that both sides would use in all these urban battles. Absolutely fantastic. Urban Operations, War, Crime, and Conflict, written by or edited by my good friend Dr. John Sullivan, retired Los Angeles sheriff detective, and his friends Nathan Jones and Daniel Argomito. Talks about the various aspects of urban operations, both military and policing. Absolutely very well done book. And at the risk of looking biased, John Spencer and I wrote the preface for it. Urban Warfare by Anthony King, Urban Warfare in the 21st Century by Anthony King. Fantastic read as well. Tony's done a pretty good job with that book. Staff Sergeant David Balabia, House to House. Staff Sergeant Balabia fought with the Big Red One at the Second Battle of Fallujah, and he ends up winning a Congressional Medal of Honor due to his efforts there. But this book will knock you on your ass. Corporal Aguirre. Staff Sergeant Balabia brings you right into the urban fight in Second Fallujah, right from the frontline soldier's point of view. Michael Evans is a British gentleman down in Australia. City Without Joy, Urban Military Operations in the 21st Century, a very thought-provoking read. I kept talking about civilians in the urban battle space, the International Commission of the Red Cross, and Civilians in Conflict, two non-government organizations, two humanitarian organizations have written these two fantastic books for military commanders on how to mitigate civilian harm in urban warfare. Great reads. And they're written in military speak, which is good. And then finally, Gregory Fremont Barnes edited this book on urban battlefields, just published about a year or so ago. And very kindly, he allowed me and my thesis advisor, Dr. Lee Windsor, to submit a chapter on Ortona on that. The Urban Warfare Institute is a think tank that was founded by John Spencer and Liam Collins. It's online. It has an electronic library that has hundreds and hundreds of resources on it. And I'm trying to update that on a regular basis. John Spencer's Urban Warfare Project, he's got dozens and dozens of articles, historical case studies, and podcasts on there. And John and Liam and I have done 16 historical case studies now on the Urban Warfare Project. So we talk about the battles, we summarize the battles, and then we talk about strategic, operational, tactical, urban warfare lessons learned for each case study. My Urban Battle of Ortona thesis for my master's degree is online with the University of Brunswick, and I talk about Ortona on YouTube as well. And the U.S. Army University Press has a Battle of Ortona, or a documentary in which they interviewed me for that. That was very kind of them. And then finally, I'm on YouTube where I talk about Ortona, the Battle of Aachen on WW2 TV. I talk about the Battle of Quay on OTD Military History. And these are other lectures I've done for military units: Battle of Seoul, Battle of Mosul. And this one at the bottom is very popular now: Urban Operations in the Russo-Ukrainian War and the Israeli-Hamas conflict. I give that to only military units. The United States Marine Corps interviewed me for their podcast, where I do historical lessons learned, the tenets of urban operations. And finally, the Canadian Army Journal, the former editor-in-chief, Dr. Adali Malhotra, asked me to be the guest editor for two urban warfare-themed editions of the Canadian Army Journal. Volume 1, Part 1 was issued last November of 2024, And this one, the second edition, just was published just before Christmas, December 2025. So that should be coming out on the streets pretty soon. And then finally, I'm on X. I don't do anything personal on X. It's 90% urban operations or warfare, 5% military history, and 5% Go Ukraine. So if you go on X, you can find my profile there where I do all kinds of urban operations, urban warfare posts. Right on. So lots of resources. There's lots of resources out there. So get into those books, get into those podcasts, and get yourself smarter on urban operations.
Sir, now before we end, which one of those books that you showed would you recommend as a starting point for somebody like me, just a corporal?
I would say Concrete Hell with Lou DeMarco. If you Concrete Hell, Lou DeMarco is a good start state.
Awesome. I guess that concludes the presentation. Thank you so much for your time, sir. I learned a lot, and especially with the 50 to 65% urban environment, this is definitely part of our profession that's going to become more important, I would assume, as time goes on. All right. So yeah, thank you so much, and we hope to have you on the show again.
Yeah, I hope to do part 3 of it. It's a 3-part series I agreed to with Sergeant Singh and Corporal Wallace, so I hope I can talk to you again.